everyone, this is Angela and welcome to my channel, Angie the ENTJ. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and click on the notification bell so that you'll know whenever I upload any new content. This video today is the third in a series that I have called Untampered Adulthood. It is intended to be a thought-provoking series that empowers you to think outside of the boxes that I believe many of you, even with the best intentions, do not even realize that you're operating within. The first part in the series was simply to demonstrate that I am not someone who is randomly throwing things together for you to mindlessly listen to. Many of my subscribers already know that. I am not the type of person to do such things. However, some of you are new, so that video was to give you a bit of insight in case you were not for sure. The second video, which I uploaded recently, was intended to give you the opportunity to entertain that possibly there is not anything that is inherently wrong with the creation of or the existence of man or the existence and creation of women. However, patriarchy oppressed women's natural affinity to pick out suitable mates, and as a result, we have a lot of unsuitable people, especially men, walking around. And I say that respectfully. Patriarchy favored boys, patriarchy favored men, so it was easier on the men than it was on the women, and as a result, there are undesirable traits in some men, and as a result, these undesirable traits populated the men more. It was not to suggest a form of eugenics or a process that directly involved racist and misogynistic people with a colonial mindset, sterilizing people who they considered through the channels of racism and misogyny to be unfit to reproduce. It was more or less to demonstrate that now, since women have agency over ourselves, we are doing what comes naturally to us. And the outcome is that men with bad traits are not being picked as mates. Now, no one is castrating the men or forcing them to get vasectomies. That would be an example of eugenics. However, they are also not being chosen by the women, and this in and of itself will also lead to more stability within individual households and the society overall. What we are seeing right now is an example of the abstract behind what I am talking about, how a woman who has not been restricted with laws that oppressed her or brainwashed with customs that benefited patriarchy is more inclined to procreate with a suitable man. And to give you a visual of this abstract, let's take a look at this here. So this is a graph showing the number of active serial unalivers that started beginning in the 1900s. And as we look at the graph from left to right, we'll see that particularly after the progress of the civil rights movement and the women's rights or women's liberation movement, we see an upticking in the 70s and 80s in particular. We're seeing a peak of the number of serial unalivers that were actively walking around at the time. Most serial unalivers were single men, so they were not being picked to be in a relationship, you understand? Moving along to another trend that was happening after the progress of the civil rights movement and the women's liberation movement, the number of abortions peaked during the 80s and the 90s. So the number of serial unalivers were not being picked to be in relationships because women were choosing not to help to bring forth the DNA of violent, neglectful, and abusive men. Additionally, and surprisingly, the number of births also, as we're seeing here, increased during the 1980s. And this coincided with the level of financial independence and the level of increased education that women were benefiting from. So even though the number of abortions went up, okay, the number of births went up too. So the silent generation and Generation X are actually the generations that saw smaller numbers of people or smaller numbers of babies being born here in the United States. So I said all of that to say that I was not, nor was I ever promoting eugenics. Now, let's go ahead and dive into part 3, where this is a bit of a focus on the masculine. And let's talk about the king, because we've been hearing the word king floating around for decades now, referring to regular everyday men, okay? The word king sort of sounds like king or Qing, like the Qing dynasty in China that ruled from 221 BC to 207 BC. And the Qing dynasty was the first unified state within that country. The word king may actually sound a bit more like the Qing dynasty or Qing dynasty. That was the final dynasty of Imperial China, which ruled from the year 1644 until World War I, when Emperor Puyi was overthrown in the year 1911. Or one can say that it sounds like Ken or Kin in Kenya, or the name of Jomo Kenyatta, who was the prime minister of Kenya after its independence from colonial rule. So where am I going with this? Well, first, bit of a disclaimer. I am never ever attempting to get people to believe what I believe in or to do the things that I do. And I also have a disclaimer saying this in my videos. What I offer is a different viewpoint to consider. I figure that there are some things that we can learn from the people who built these things right here. And if you're just listening in, what I'm describing are the ancient Egyptian pyramids and temples, which is why I sometimes use their language, Medu Neter, in my videos to explain the concept. It's because many of you all are English speakers. And if you happen to be multilingual, more than likely you're multilingual with another language that is less than 2,000 years old. The English language showed up on the scene only about 1,600 years ago. And its current form that we're most familiar with about 1,400 years ago. French showed up on the scene about 1,200 years ago. And Spanish is only about 700 years old. So bear in mind, these regions in Europe where these languages are coming from were constantly being invaded by Rome. And so they experienced a loss of a lot of ancient knowledge, okay? So what you are missing, unlike people who are speaking languages that have been around for several thousands of years, is insight that has been passed down by people who have survived invasions, survived famines, as well as have technical skills that were forged over many millennia. And these cultures survived and were able to stay intact. So they were able to keep that knowledge within their language. Also, there are words that exist in ancient languages that do not have an English equivalent, which you will see as I go further. So since many of you are lacking such insight, I am using a language that is derived from a people who had documented both men and women as rulers, that was spoken before the Greek or the Roman empires, that was spoken before the trans-Saharan and transatlantic slave trade even began. And this language was older than the European witch hunts or the Inquisition that happened with the Catholic Church during that time in Europe. And this was before also the Abrahamic religions. Respectfully, the language predates that. So regardless of your background, what you believe, or even your lack of it if you're atheist, I still urge you to listen in so that you can gain some insight from a language, Medu Neter that is, that uses over 700 core characters in different types of script, creating about 2,000 characters altogether in order to form their words in Medu Neter language, so that you can at least give your thought processing an opportunity to grow beyond the scope of what English offers, which uses only 26 characters to form its words, as opposed to the 700 core characters in Medu Neter. In other words, whether you agree with me or disagree with me matters less. What I'm urging you to do is to at least allow yourself to grow beyond the box that you may not even realize that you're in. So with that, I'm moving along. From my perspective, the word king in English, which claims to have an etymology of koning in the old Germanic language. Now, that sure does sound similar to the king of the Qing dynasty, or the king of the Qing dynasty, as well as the king of the Kenya. It also sounds like king in Medu Neter. Medu Neter is a language that literally translates to mean the sounds of nature or sacred words. So in the eyes of the Metu, or the ancient Egyptians, the ability to break stones required a lot of physical force. And also the sound associated with that process, whether or not the person was using another rock to break the stone or a chisel and hitting it with a mallet, that sound was king. And they considered the person with such power to be a brave man. Take the stonemason, for instance. Not only is he breaking the rock, he's also lifting it. He's also fashioning it. And he also has to brave the weather, risk his life in order to construct something that can last for potentially thousands of years. Not only that, he had to be exact with his measurements, and he had to be sure, because it's a lot of effort that went into chiseling that stone. If you mess up, it's going to take a lot of effort to start back over again, if it is even possible, because a mistake could cost him, or whoever was sponsoring him, a lot of time, a lot of resources. It may even cost him his life or someone else's. So with that, moving along, I spoke briefly about the Qing dynasty. Some people may correct me and say that it is pronounced as Qin. That word also exists in Medu Neter too, Qin, that is. And depending on the usage, its meaning can be like asking the question where, or saying you, as in you all. However, the word king not only refers to having power and bravery, it is also the base word for kinit, which means yellow. And the Qing dynasty viewed yellow as a very auspicious color amongst, many other colors. So there are many other words that Qing is used in beyond describing brave men, such as describing something or someone who is fat. Generally in nature, the biggest animal also is the one that eats the most. So in a time when money did not exist, the ancients saw a fat person as someone who had power, because it meant that they did not have to burn calories like everybody else. Another word derived from Qin is kini, which describes a powerful speech. Kined, which describes anger. Okay? And the animal that you see in this word that they're using as a determinative for kined, or that type of anger, is a baboon.
A tribe of baboons were spotted traveling together, not knowing that a leopard was lurking behind, looking for an opening to attack. In a flash, the leopard takes off and looks for a target. A brave alpha baboon sees the danger and immediately charges at the leopard, prompting nearby baboons to also attack the cheetah. Overwhelmed by sheer force and tenacity, the tables have turned, and the leopard is in a vulnerable position, having to run away in defeat.
A number of hikers have just been left with broken legs after a group of baboons started pushing rocks off of the cliff's edge, some of which weighed up to 60 kg. It said the baboons became agitated when they saw these 7 men abseiling down their territory in the remote South African mountains. The group had reached a narrow ledge when they suddenly came under fire from a barrage of giant rocks, smashing in between them and exploding on impact. This sent razor-sharp rock shards flying like shrapnel, breaking the legs of 3 of the hikers who collapsed in agony. As they sheltered in the cliff face, one of them managed to make an SOS call and they were airlifted to hospital. The question is, has the uprising begun?
If you ain't got my money on my birds, I'm killing you and
911. Has been cleared to a non-public.
See, yes, it's true that chimpanzees and gorillas got some FAFO for anybody that wants to try them. However, the baboons are the ones that are with the ish. They got the ish, okay? On this photo, it says that police in ancient Egypt used baboons to catch thieves because of their speed, their ability to jump to places that are difficult for humans to reach, and they're ranked 3rd in the animal world in terms of memory power, so they can easily remember the face of the thief. I wish there was a way that police departments could use baboons here the way that they use dogs here in the US. I guarantee you that the crime rate will go down a good 95%, because dogs can't climb up on top of stuff. The baboons got you though, and they're real smart. There was this one Chakama baboon in South Africa that changed railroad signals.
Animals that had real-life jobs, Part 1. Behind me, you can see a baboon standing on a platform next to a railway. This baboon's name was Jack, and he actually worked as a signalman for quite some time. Jack the baboon operated for 9 years for South African Railways. This was between 1881 to 1890. Jack was actually an extremely capable worker. He worked for 9 years without making a single mistake, and he was even paid. If you're wondering how much he was paid 20 cents per day, and converted to today's value, this would be roughly $6. He was also given half a bottle of beer per week, of course, to take the edge off.
So yeah, that was Jack. He knew how to sweep the floor, take out the trash, and so many other things too. And Jack's payment was some pocket change and a shot of liquor. And if he was not given his liquor, he gave you the ish. So Jack the baboon worked dutifully for nearly a decade until he passed away from tuberculosis. So baboons are smart, but they're also with the ish, and the ancients used them as a way to describe anger, a kaned. So going back to the words that can be found with the base word of king from the ancient perspective, kenebet was used to describe the courts, like the physical force involved in law enforcement. Kini could use to be described a garment for a ceremony, which kind of brings me back to the word kinit, or the word for yellow. So if the ancients were to come back to life for a day and saw the Pope in his garment, they would describe it as being kinit, meaning this is someone who is displaying power. Kinit is yellow, but I shared all of this to get to the bottom words here, which are ken and kenin. King is the sound made by the stonemason when he beats his mallet on the chisel, which is why the mallet he is using to hit the chisel in Meduneter is called king yit. Okay? King is also a word used to describe the sound of someone's crushing herbs, like for a medicine in with a mortar and a pestle, right? So that king. What the root word king describes more or less is the process of taking something that was natural, okay? It was in its unaltered state, and then processing it in a way that aids the one who is either beating the stone, king, 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 or crushing the herbs for the medicine, king, king, king. So, king can be beneficial, right? Well, this word is also used to describe beating someone or doing them wrongly, violating them. Because the person who is doing the violating is the one king, 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 king to the other person, breaking them down from their natural state into something that is man-made. And the word below is kinin, and it is the word for supremacy. Kin in Meduneter, in many ways, represents man breaking something natural into parts and organizing it into something that is convenient for his use, like a stonemason with a chisel, taking something natural and creating something according to his vision, something like a building or a temple or a statue, okay? A lot of the words in Meduneter have a dual nature about them because it is used to indicate harmony or disharmony. The force that can be used to crush medicine, to give to people and help them to heal, that same force can be used against them to harm the people or anything else like nature. The force that is used to fashion gemstones into beautiful pieces of wearable art, the same force that women exert while giving birth, the same power that leadership uses to benefit the people, such as using stones to build institutions or even to build homes. This keen force can be used in a beneficial way that enables everyone to flourish. However, keen, when used recklessly and carelessly and in such a manner that causes disharmony, can be very destructive. A disharmonious kin shows up in the form of oppression and brutality. And the thing is that for a lot of men, they have been allowed to use king without fully understanding its nature. And a lot of times they use the disharmonious version of king because this is what they know. They have their mental hammer and they have their mental chisel, and they just go and king all throughout their lives. They king at their jobs. They king at their mental health. For instance, the state of Montana is the state in the U.S. that currently has the highest number of self-unalivement rates. And the majority of the people who are unaliving themselves are men. They king throughout their issues because that is the only thing that they know how to do. It was the only thing that the patriarchy accepted, because when the patriarchy needed men to use king on others in combat, or to use king to build up their cities, they wanted to ensure that the men will be there front and central. And if we women, who used to be the other half of humanity, but now we're in a bit of scarcity right now, if we women had anything to say about it, then the patriarchy was all right when the men would king against us. Because the man is the king of his 1972 modular home on Oak Street, and all the subjects, his wife, children, and the dog, must yield to him, right? King. And he expected them to accept his form of abuse, and they had to king through it themselves. All you need to do is ask someone who works with mental health patients, and you will see a common pattern in family therapy, especially, where a man gets yelled at by his boss, then he comes home and he slaps his wife, and the wife then turns around and beat the kids, and the kids are angry and they kick the dog. But when the dog snaps back at the kids, the poor dog ends up outside in the doghouse. So it's a whole entire king circle. And now here we are in 2024, and we're in a situation like, what's that line from that song by Biggie Smalls, the 10 Crack Commandments? So we're in 2024, and that line where he said, money and blood don't mix like two eggplants and no chick. Fill in the blank on the eggplant part. Of course, Biggie Smalls was speaking as a heterosexual man. If you happen to be rainbow, there's no hate over here. But going back to what I was saying, if you happen to be heterosexual and single as a dude, then we are living in the equivalent of a Greek tragedy where there are not enough women and there are too many men. The world is basically a sausage fest. Or, as Biggie Smalls eloquently put it back in the day, it's like trying to mix with two eggplants and no chick. This deficit in the number of women and girls is because of the combination of girls being selectively aborted or buried alive shortly after their birth, as well as the ongoing femicide. And every day, women in the United States and globally are still being unalived at the hands of men who claim to love them. The men who had to be the king, presiding over their lives. All hail the king, beating them and breaking them down from their unaltered nature and into man-made roles that were measured to be built and to fit the patriarchy. So if you lasted this long in this video, especially if you are a man, you are probably trying to figure out what to do now. What are we going to do at this time? Seems like everything that you have been told up until this point has been nothing more than smoke and mirrors. And you are sitting here today trying to figure out how to forge ahead. And of course that's natural, because that's the only tool that you have been given. Just the ability to king through your life, right? Well, listen, as I stated earlier, we English-speaking people are using the Roman alphabet to form the English language, and that only has 26 letters or 26 characters. Meduneter has over 700 hieroglyphs written in multiple scripts and creating over 2,000 characters as a result. There are words in Meduneter that do not have an English equivalent, and one of those words are Nasut-Biti. Nasut-Biti is the term that was used to describe the ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt during dynastic times. I know that it is saying king in the definition that you're looking at, but once again, realize it is because there was no other English word to approximate what it meant to be the ruler of ancient Egypt. Even the word pharaoh is inaccurate because it is derived from Greeks attempting to say the word in Meduneter, pera, or per-a, okay, which means the house of the great or the great house. Or, in other words, a palace. And that's not necessarily the palace of the Nasubiti, because the palace of the Nasubiti was called Per-Nasubiti or Per-Nasu or Per-Biti. So calling the Nasubiti a pharaoh is the equivalent of calling King Charles the Buckingham Palace, or the equivalent of calling a U.S. president the White House instead of President so-and-so, just to kind of give you some insight. So unlike English and many other languages, Meduneter is not just a collection of hieroglyphs to provide a written way to show how a word sounds. Instead, it uses pictures, if I may, to convey multiple layers of meaning based on what is depicted in nature. So the first hieroglyph that you see right now is Nesu, and it represents sedge, or the type of grass that is used to make baskets. The second symbol is a bug, that is a bee. And the two half circles beneath Nasut and Biti are representations of bread. Now, the core word of Biti is bi, which means a good deed or something of good merit. When we go to the word bit, it means a good character, and it can also mean a loaf of bread. So still to this day, It is true that in order to make bread from scratch, it requires resources and a lot of work. It requires land to grow the grain and the ability to process it, or process the grain from the field into flour, and to collect all the other ingredients required to make the bread. You know, the ability to work the oven and process the bread from the grain through the milling process into the oven and onto the table. It takes a lot of work. We tend to take for granted what the ancients had to go through. It is also something that can be given as an offering because, you know, as simple as bread is to us, to make it from scratch, you got to knead it. It requires a lot of force. So it was symbolic of peace that this person or these people were willing to go through all of this to create bread and then offer it to you. That was a peaceful gesture back then. And in a similar fashion, the bee goes through a lot of work to collect the pollen and make some honey. And the honey is sweet and you can survive off of it. Just like you can kind of survive off the bread, you can survive off the honey too. So now more on the first symbol, Nesu. Nesu represents this type of grass called sedge. Sedge grows in wetlands and it prefers to be near a water source. Its roots are edible. It can also be used to make baskets. Sedge also benefits the ecosystem by keeping the weeds at bay. It helps to preserve the soil and even helps to build up the soil. Sedge also has medicinal benefits in terms of diabetes and aiding with diarrhea and indigestion. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not giving medical advice. Please consult with your medical professionals. So, sedge is also an indicator species of sorts. So if the sedge is not doing well, if the sedge is unhealthy, then you know that something is up with the ground because normally it's relatively easy for sedge to thrive. So if it begins to die off or grow kind of weird or has different colors, it's time to start paying attention, you know, because there's something else going on. The Nesubiti had to be able to improve the environment like the sedge grass. He had to behave like that. He had to be a resource for everyone, providing the things that the people needed in order to survive, such as food, such as medicine, such as the resources that the people can use to make life there more organized and more convenient. Moving along to the next hieroglyph, what you're looking at is the bee, or biti. Bees are also another indicator species. Checking on the health of bees is similar to checking on the health of the overall ecosystem. Bees are essential to the ecosystem because without them, we humans and a lot of animals will be unalived from starvation because bees pollinate the plants. And then, you know, there's the cycle where the animals eat the plants. Then humans, along with various species of other animals, eat the animals that eat the plants. So if bees are affected, then everything and everyone potentially can be affected right along with them. Bees are also very hardworking. They will work from sun up to sundown. They can work up to 12 hours a day. A bit of a fun fact about the state of Utah, their state motto is that they are the beehive state, which is an attribute to the bees' work ethic. Also, there are beehive statues on the steps of the state capitol in Salt Lake City. Going back to what biti symbolizes, bees will also defend the hive at all costs. A bee is willing to sacrifice its own life to defend the hive, the queen, and its babies. And the bee has ultraviolet vision to help it navigate through spaces and places that are highly congested in order to get the job done and pollinate the flowers. So the Nesubiti, just like the bee, has to be able to accomplish these kinds of things. He has to be willing to go down with the ship if necessary in order to protect the land and its people. The way that bees will swarm around and attack anything, losing its life in the process, that is a threat to the hive. The Nesubiti has to be very hardworking, working from sunup to sundown and navigating through difficult situations to get it done, to get the job done. Bees are very organized, and the Nasubiti has to operate in the same way. So the Nasubiti was the ruler who had to provide and oversee all of these things for the people. He had to be sensitive to the things on the ground that may threaten the health of the sedge plant, literally, or the things on the ground figuratively that could threaten the foundation of the nation. And he also had to have the type of ultraviolet vision to assist him in seeing things that others may not readily notice. He also had to have the capacity or the ability to navigate through those abstract situations, just like the bee uses its ultraviolet vision to navigate through thick foliage. An example of things that need this type of ultraviolet vision are economic indicators, for instance. Something like the CPI or the Consumer Price Index can help one to gauge the well-being of the society. So for an example of a CPI or Consumer Price Index, if you spend $200 at the grocery store 10 years ago, you'd probably walk away with an overflowing cart of groceries. Now $200 may fill a few bags. So the Nasubiti would see this and understand that people are struggling, and he would do things to ease the pressure so that people do not end up going into survival mode, which could lead to him being overthrown. Even the most dictatorial autocrat will be overthrown if the people end up in survival mode. This happened during the Arab Spring in 2010, also in Sri Lanka a couple of years ago, and recently in Bangladesh. And uprisings are currently brewing. There's an undertow throughout the continent of Africa as we speak. And we can even go back hundreds of years ago with the French Revolution. So when the people are not provided with what they need in order to survive and they go into survival mode, the leader tends to get overthrown. So the Nasubiti always had to be keenly aware of the health of the nation, right down to the individual, because any neglect could lead to him being overthrown. So going back to the type of ultraviolet vision that the Nasubiti had to have, the same can be said with high or low unemployment, interest rates, for instance, inflation, retail sales. If no one is buying goods, then the factories may shut down. So the Nasubiti had to have this ultraviolet type of vision, figuratively speaking, in order to stay on top of things that would threaten his ability to stay on the throne. And here's the part that one may not immediately pick up on. The sedge grass is on the ground and the bee is just quietly flying around. Neither of them are imposing life forms. The sedge grass is growing on the ground and blending into the scenery, and the bee is just busy going on about its business. They are not big and glamorous and imposing like lions and elephants, but they are highly effective at what they do. This is what it means to be a Nasubiti in terms of manhood versus a king. Masculinity does not have to be loud and imposing like the king, 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 king of breaking rocks. However, masculinity needs to be effective and resourceful, or it will be overthrown by the people if it tries to impose itself in a king, king, king fashion. So as you can see, being a Nasubiti is beyond the scope of being a king, a K-I-N-G king, or the king, 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 king. See, people like Andrew Tate, Kevin Samuels, Fresh and Fit, and so forth only focus on the disharmonious aspects of being a king in the Medunetter sense. And their advice reflected it from them telling young men to go do push-ups, go to the gym, to be loud and obnoxious, to steamroll over anyone who disagrees with them, to be okay with creating disharmonious interactions with women. That is what they deemed to be masculine. Just king your way through life. King against the people. Physically, emotionally, it does not matter the amount of damage. Just king on through. Just bang or king on your chest. Yell through your Adam's apple. Plow through and break it down, and don't attempt to understand why it exists in its natural state. You just beat your way through it. Beat your way through the stone and build a house. Beat your way through women, children, elderly, vulnerable people, the wildlife, the ecosystem, or anything or anyone else who you should be protecting. And where has all of this king, where has this gotten us all to? Where are we right now? I'll tell you where we are. Right now, there are millions of more boys and men on the planet, and not enough girls and women because of the disharmonious king mentality. And that's just with the population. I won't even begin to speak on the climate crisis. So when you care for your surroundings in such a way that everything and everyone thrives, then there will be abundance. It will not be achieved by the type of disharmonious and damaging brute force that grifters in the manosphere constantly promote. As a matter of fact, it's the type of mentality that got us all here where we are today on the planet, with different species of animals going extinct daily, wars either brewing or raging, and in the midst of a climate crisis, because men confuse the power of bravery and brute physical force with the power of being Nasut Biti, someone who is very attuned to everything that's going on the ground, very attuned to everything that's going on all around, who is looking for solutions to complex issues with ultraviolet vision. Having harmonious kin energy is good. It's good for a man to be brave and strong and powerful, that version of kin. However, it is not the only energy that is involved with being a man, and definitely it has less to do with leadership. Again, I am not attempting to have people be like me. Listen, don't even be like me, okay? I am just sharing a different perspective and a different viewpoint. Just a way for you to think outside of a big and transparent box that you may not have even realized that you were within. And per usual, what I'm about to say is for the grifters only. I feel the need to say this because I know that the grifters are looking to shift. And I'm telling you right now to go on down the road with your bull crap and don't use my content. I have been mild in my reaction in the past, simply because I know my own strength. I, as someone who is truly a strong person, I do not need to do things to prove to others how heavy-handed I can become. However, if you are a grifter and you attempt to take my concepts in order to mislead people and scam them out of their money, leaving them broken and hurt and confused in the process, then you will see the other side of me. Now, again, for the rest of you who are not grifters, listen, I am all right with goodwill people using the content so long as you give credit. And the reason why is so that people can have the opportunity to understand the full scope of what is being presented to them. So if you're not a grifter, I'm cool with you. But if you're a grifter, go on down the road with that. So that's all I have to say for now. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and click on the notifications bell so that you'll know whenever I upload any new content. Take care until next time.